This is a question we rarely ask ourselves, but there was a man who wanted us to confront this. The man who transformed literature into a mirror of the human soul. A man who turned stories into a place where we confront the deepest questions of existence. In his pages, fiction is no escape. It is a battlefield where we wrestle with truth, freedom, guilt, faith, and despair, and everything you face today existentially. He was not just a writer, but a surgeon of the soul. He did not offer comfort. He did not give easy answers. Instead, he forced us into life's chaos, where every choice carries both sin and grace, reason and madness. His name is Fyodor Dostoevsky. To read him is to risk looking into a mirror and seeing not the mask we wear, but the truth we hide. So, if you think you are too weak to look into that mirror, this video is probably not for you, but still I am going to discuss his wisdom in this long video, so we can all answer this question. Man is a mystery. It needs to be unraveled. And if you spend your whole life unraveling it, don't say that you've wasted your time. I am studying that mystery because I want to be a human being. With these words, Dostoevsky sets the stage for his life's central concern, the enigma of what it means to be human. For him, existence cannot be reduced to mere survival. The real question is not how to live, but why. He observed that even if every material need were satisfied, if there were bread enough for all, people would still destroy themselves rather than remain on earth without meaning or faith. This hunger for purpose, deeper than physical appetite, is the essence of the human mystery. Dostoevsky shows us that man lives in contradiction. In the Brothers Karamazov, a doctor proclaims he loves humanity so much he would endure crucifixion for it. Yet he admits he cannot endure the company of any individual for more than 2 days. The more I love mankind in general, the less I love man in particular. This paradox reveals the riddle Dostoevsky explored all his life. We are capable of noble ideals and lofty dreams, yet we stumble when confronted with the messy reality of individuals. Our highest aspirations often collide with our deepest weaknesses. This tension still defines modern life. We long for freedom but fear its weight. We cling to ideals yet are easily consumed by doubt. To Dostoevsky, these contradictions are not accidents, but the very fabric of human nature. To wrestle with them is to take the mystery of man seriously. One of his most striking insights concerns the danger of self-deception. Lying to ourselves is more deeply ingrained than lying to others. He saw that the gravest falsehood is not directed outward, but inward. Elder Zosima warns in the Brothers Karamazov, "Above all, do not lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to such a pass that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and others, and having no respect, he ceases to love." Here, Dostoevsky describes the slow corrosion of the soul. First truth is blurred, then respect disappears, and finally love itself dies. He dramatizes this through his characters. Raskolnikov convinces himself he is an extraordinary man, exempt from morality, only to find his reasoning collapse under guilt. Ivan Karamazov wrestles with rationalizations that went into madness. Even seemingly ordinary figures in his novels deceive themselves until they can no longer tell fantasy from reality. Dostoevsky's warning is timeless. The most dangerous illusions are the ones we craft for ourselves. In our age of digital echo chambers and curated identities, his insight is more pressing than ever. Honesty with oneself is the foundation of honesty with others. Closely tied to this is Dostoevsky's view of wisdom. Like Socrates, he insisted that the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. Intellectual arrogance, he believed, blinds us to life's depth. Even Karamazov's brilliant arguments about justice and suffering collapse because his rationalism cannot embrace compassion. Nothing in this world is harder than speaking the truth. Nothing easier than flattery, Dostoevsky remarked, underlining how truth demands humility while falsehood flows easily. He even wrote that the cleverest of all is the man who calls himself a fool at least once a month. To acknowledge ignorance is, paradoxically, the beginning of real understanding. Those who cling to certainty end up imprisoned in their own rigid logic, unable to face the unpredictable mystery of life. Those who accept their limits remain open to growth, to questioning, and to love. Dostoevsky's critique anticipates our own world, where information is abundant, but wisdom scarce. He reminds us that knowing facts is not the same as grasping truth. Truth requires humility. For Dostoevsky, the mystery of man can never be solved by intellect alone. It must be lived with honesty, humility, and love. We are torn by contradictions, threatened by self-deception, and tempted by arrogance. Yet it is precisely within these tensions that our dignity lies. By confronting our own falsehoods, admitting our ignorance, and embracing others in their imperfection, we begin to unravel the riddle. That is why Dostoevsky still speaks to us, because he compels us to face ourselves. To study the mystery of man as he did is not an abstract exercise, but a path toward being fully human. He once wrote, "In the end, they will lay their freedom at our feet and say to us, 'Make us your slaves, but feed us.'" The parable imagines Christ returning to 16th century Spain only to be met not with celebration, but with condemnation from the Grand Inquisitor himself. The Inquisitor's argument is ruthless. Humanity, he claims, is too frail to handle genuine freedom. Left to themselves, people will choose servitude over liberty, so long as someone promises them bread, order, and certainty. Here, Dostoevsky crystallizes a disturbing truth. Freedom is not only a gift, but a heavy burden. Millions, he suggests, will gladly abandon the torment of moral responsibility. They would rather be slaves if it means never facing hunger or chaos. Put in today's language, this is the timeless tension between liberty and security. We see how easily fear can tempt people into trading conscience for ideology, or independence for comfort. When life grows unbearable, it is, as Dostoevsky says, no wonder weeping becomes man. But for many, the silence of mystery and the absence of guarantees lead not to faith but to despair, sometimes even to cursing God. And yet, Dostoevsky does not simply endorse the cynicism of the Inquisitor. The story is framed through Ivan Karamazov's skeptical voice, probing the old problem of theodicy. Why does a good God allow suffering? But the novel does not end there. Through Alyosha and the teachings of Elder Zosima, Dostoevsky presents a counterpoint, an answer not in grand theological systems, but in love and responsibility. The Inquisitor warns that mankind longs to surrender freedom to authority, for as he declares, the crowd is tortured by no greater anxiety than to find someone quickly to whom he can hand over that great gift of freedom. Dostoevsky's warning still rings today. Any authority, religious, political, or otherwise, that demands blind obedience toys with fire. Against that, Christ's quiet kiss in the parable stands as a silent, radiant reminder that true freedom is inseparable from love. Without a clear perception of his reasons for living, man will not consent to live, and will sooner destroy himself than tarry on earth. This is another unsettling insight voiced in The Grand Inquisitor. Few lines capture the human condition more starkly. For Dostoevsky, the great trial of existence is not hunger or persecution, but the silence of God, the absence of a clear answer to why we suffer and why we live. Ivan Karamazov embodies this struggle. His doubt is not shallow atheism, but a deeply wounded protest against meaningless pain, especially the suffering of innocence. In modern language, this is the shape of existential crisis. When tragedy strikes without reason, when wars and famines crush lives without justice, the soul demands meaning. Without it, people often slide into despair or nihilism. Ivan's rebellion is not born of hatred, but of what one critic calls angry love, his refusal to accept a universe that seems indifferent to human agony. Dostoevsky does not offer neat answers. Instead, he forces us to dwell in the tension. If God is silent, then the weight of meaning falls on us. The clear perception he demands is not scientific proof or philosophical certainty, but the recognition of our responsibility for one another. His challenge is blunt. In a meaningless world, we either destroy ourselves or we create meaning through compassion. Brothers, do not fear man's sins. Love man in his sin too, for such love resembles God's love, the highest possible form of love on earth. Love God's creation. Love every atom of it separately, and love every green leaf, every ray of God's light. If you come to love all things, you will perceive God's mystery in all things. These luminous words come from Elder Zosima, and they form the counterweight to Ivan's despair, where the Inquisitor offers authority and Ivan offers rebellion, Zosima offers love. His teaching is radically simple. Even when the world seems senseless, the path of redemption lies in loving it all, the sinner and the saint, the broken and the whole. For Dostoevsky, this love is not abstract, nor sentimental. It is a daily discipline, a way of seeing the divine in every detail of existence. Zosima insists that to love even the sinner is to touch God's own way of loving the world. Dostoevsky knew what it meant to stand face to face with death. Blindfolded before a firing squad in 1849, he felt the final seconds of life slip away, only to be spared at the very last moment. "I was at the last instant and now I live again," he later wrote, describing that experience as a rebirth through terror. From that day forward, every heartbeat carried a new sacredness. Suffering was no longer an enemy. It was the furnace that purified his soul. Few writers have walked so deeply into the valley of pain. Condemned, imprisoned, stripped of dignity in Siberia's frozen barracks, and later tormented by epilepsy and tuberculosis, Dostoevsky became a man carved by suffering. From the waterlogged cells of the Peter and Paul fortress to the brutal labor camps of Omsk, he saw humanity at its most raw. He discovered that suffering, far from being meaningless torment, was the gateway to compassion, faith, and an understanding of life's true worth. In prison, he encountered thieves, killers, and outcasts, yet behind each hardened face he glimpsed the human spark. Rather than crushing him, the years in Siberia dissolved his pride and taught him mercy. Life is everywhere. Life in ourselves, not in what is outside us, he wrote to his brother. To be a man among people and remain a man forever. This is life. This is the task of life. I have realized this, and it has entered into my flesh and blood. Even with his freedom gone, he celebrated that he could still love, still remember, still hope, and that, he insisted, is life. We see the sun. Out of this crucible, Dostoevsky forged a vision of humanity where suffering is not wasted but redeemed. In The House of the Dead, he portrayed prisoners as both brutal and strangely wise, men whose pain had stripped them bare yet given them depth. In Notes from the Underground, he voiced the rage of alienation, but also its hidden yearning for connection. Suffering, he believed, revealed both the worst and the best in us. But he did not stop at observation. He drew a moral law from it. Compassion born from pain is the highest human calling. Love a man even in his sin, he wrote, for that love is a likeness of the divine love. To suffer with others was for him not weakness, but the path to holiness. His harshest trials became the soil where love took root. This lesson would resonate far beyond his own century. Viktor Frankl, writing from a Nazi concentration camp, echoed Dostoevsky's discovery that no matter the chains imposed on the body, the soul retains its freedom in how it responds. Spiritual freedom, which cannot be taken away, makes life meaningful and purposeful. Dostoevsky lived this truth long before Frankl named it. Where everything else was stripped away, he found the one freedom that remains inviolable, the freedom of the heart. Dostoevsky's life thus stands as proof that suffering, terrible as it is, need not destroy us. Instead, it can carve open the soul, burn away illusions, and reveal the dignity that endures beneath every wound. His writings whisper to us still. Only through suffering can we learn compassion, and only through compassion can we touch the mystery of the human soul. At 28, standing blindfolded before a firing squad, Dostoevsky heard the drums of death roll. He believed he had only moments left to live before the rifles cracked. Then, at the last instant, his sentence was commuted. That brush with execution gave him a reverence for life that never left him. What followed, years of backbreaking labor in a Siberian penal camp, the gnawing cold of exile, epileptic seizures, and lingering illness, did not harden him. Instead, it opened his eyes to the fragile dignity in every human being. In the frozen barracks of Omsk, he shared black bread with murderers and thieves men society had discarded as beyond redemption, yet he discovered something luminous even in them. In the House of the Dead, he recorded how these so-called villains could reveal startling kindness, humor, or flashes of nobility. As he once wrote, "A true friend of mankind will be able to discover the diamonds in the filth." From then on, he could no longer see the world in simple categories of good and evil. Suffering, he realized, exposes both the ugliness and the hidden worth of the human soul. This conviction poured into his novels. Sonia, the destitute prostitute in Crime and Punishment, becomes a source of redemption for the murderer Raskolnikov, precisely because her life of suffering has made her tender and selfless. In the Brothers Karamazov, the young Kolya perceives goodness in others that adults overlook. For Dostoevsky, every character who carried light did so not in spite of suffering, but because of it. Suffering also revealed to him the limits of reason. Intellectual systems, he believed, could never fully explain the mystery of human anguish. His underground man mocked the dream of reducing humanity to pure calculation. For what is a man without desires, without free will, and without choice, if not a stop in an organ? The irrationality of pain, paradoxically, proved our humanity. We are not machines. To suffer, even to rebel against suffering, is to affirm life's reality and our own freedom. For Dostoevsky, brokenness itself became a kind of revelation. To live without suffering was not only impossible, but dangerous. For despair often cracks open the heart to hope. To live without hope is to cease to live, he wrote. After years of torment, he told his brother, "Life is a gift, life is happiness." That statement is not naive optimism. It is the hard-earned creed of a man who had seen both hell and the possibility of grace. His own agony taught him to look beyond himself. Having once stood before the rifles, he later campaigned against the death penalty. Having suffered in Siberia, he devoted his writing to giving voice to society's outcasts. In the Brothers Karamazov, Father Zosima embodies this hard-won wisdom, that sin and suffering are shared, and only by carrying each other's burdens can we become truly human. This truth is not confined to Dostoevsky's age. Even today, we see echoes of his vision. Survivors of tragedy often dedicate their lives to easing the pain of others. Caregivers who have borne their own wounds show a compassion that can't be learned from books. Entire movements for justice have risen from collective grief, transforming private anguish into communal strength. Dostoevsky teaches us that suffering is not only to be endured, but to be transfigured. It can strip us bare, but in that bareness lies our depth. From the scaffold, from the prison yard, from the sickbed, he emerged with a wisdom forged in fire, that suffering awakens us, deepens us, and, if we let it, teaches us how to love. In The Idiot, Prince Mishkin recounts the story of a man who had faced a firing squad and been granted infinite life. Yet Mishkin mourns that the man squandered the gift and didn't live that way at all and lost many, many minutes. Dostoevsky is warning us here, survival alone is not enough. To receive life a second time and still live carelessly is the deepest tragedy. His own survival demanded a response, to live as if each moment were priceless, because it was. After the mock execution, his view of the world changed utterly. Before, he had been consumed by debates in Europe's intellectual salons, chasing ideas and theories. Afterward, those abstractions shrank into trivialities. He had stared into the abyss and returned with a new certainty. Now hardly anything can frighten me, let come what may. The fear of death had been replaced by something more enduring, a sense of freedom and a burning purpose. That brush with death did not only alter his perspective, it rooted him in gratitude. What he learned in that Moscow square is what survivors of near-death experiences often report even today. The obvious is no longer obvious. Suddenly, to feel the sun, to see a face, to hear laughter becomes everything. In the modern world, we glimpse this same transformation. Communities rebuilding after tragedies, survivors of pandemics or wars, astronauts gazing back at Earth's fragile blue. Each discovers what Dostoevsky saw, that life's fragility is what makes it sacred. He carried this lesson like a wound that glowed. Gratitude was no longer sentimental, but essential, the very rhythm of existence. To live meant to count each breath, to treat each encounter as holy. His novels whisper this truth over and over. The only way to live fully is to live as if time itself is on loan. The perennial lesson is simple, yet never easy. To face death, and instead of despairing, to discover in it a summons to live more deeply. Dostoevsky's ordeal makes us ask ourselves, are we wasting our many, many minutes? Or do we recognize, as he did, that every sunrise is a miracle, every heartbeat an age of happiness? He once wrote, "Nothing pleases man so much as free will, and yet there is nothing that makes him suffer more." Dostoevsky knew this truth not as an abstract idea, but as lived reality. Shackled in Siberia, staring down the certainty of death, and then the long wait of exile, he discovered that while the body may be chained, the soul remains its own master. True freedom, he came to believe, lies in choosing one's inner path. Dostoevsky understood that no tyrant, no illness, no earthly power could dictate the human spirit. His novels transformed that conviction into flesh and blood. Ivan Karamazov refuses to surrender to fate. The underground man snarls at utopias that would strip him of choice. And in The Idiot, when Prince Mishkin is asked, "Who allowed you to go on living?" he answers, "I don't know. It seemed to me that I had no right to live, but why I do not know. Let those who sent me shiver." The lesson is unmistakable. Survival does not require permission, only responsibility for one's own existence. In prison, Dostoevsky witnessed the difference between captivity of the body and freedom of the mind. One convict rebelled by humming a folk song in his chains. Another found God within the walls that confined him. For Dostoevsky, these small acts revealed an unshakable truth. Spiritual freedom cannot be crushed. He wrote that even after years in captivity, he preserved my spirit and heart in purity. I shall be reborn to a better thing. This conviction became the heartbeat of Notes from Underground. Its protagonist insists that it is better to choose suffering than to live as a predictable machine. He mocks the very idea of a perfect life, warning that men would destroy it simply to prove they are free. If everyone agreed with everything we said, he writes, life would stop having its glorious significance. For Dostoevsky, free will is not a luxury, but the essence of human dignity, even when it leads to pain, irrationality, or ruin. No wonder conscience returns again and again in his work. He saw it as the ultimate court of appeal, beyond the reach of law, politics, or science. Dostoevsky would have understood it once. His orthodox faith had already taught him that while regimes may cage the body, only the soul can imprison itself. This defiance through choice is not confined to the 19th century. Modern dissidents who compose poetry on scraps of paper, prisoners who stage silent vigils, or survivors of illness who choose hope each morning, All wield the same freedom Dostoevsky defended. Their bodies may be contained, but their will is sovereign. Without this freedom, he warned, life collapses into mechanism. In Notes from Underground, he imagines a utopia so orderly that even trivial choices disappear, where even breaking a glass without reason would be forbidden. The absurdity proves his point. Without the freedom to choose, even foolishly, we cease to be human. We become organ pipes, hollow and soulless. The lesson remains urgent today. Our chains may look different: poverty, censorship, illness, or even the invisible constraints of algorithms. But the will resists control. Whether in a prison cell, a hospital bed, or the disorienting flood of the digital world, the spark of choice endures. That is why Dostoevsky titled one of his novels, Demons. Political and social forces may haunt a society, but if the spirit remains free, their power is broken. Dostoevsky's life proves that no suffering is final, no death absolute, no chain unbreakable to the human soul. From the frozen solitude of Siberia to the shadow of the executioner, he found that suffering could refine rather than destroy. It opened his eyes to compassion, taught him to recognize every breath as a miracle, and gave his pen the power to speak for the broken and the oppressed. His words still echo into our time of crisis and distraction. He warns us that without suffering, we cannot learn to love deeply, that only by confronting mortality does life become sacred, and that the will to choose, however fragile, is an indomitable flame. Nothing is more sublime than the plight of the good man who suffers, he wrote, because through suffering we glimpse the divine. Above all, don't lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and for others. Dostoevsky was not writing abstractions when he gave us this warning in the Brothers Karamazov. He was pointing to the most dangerous battlefield of all, the human soul. The war within is not fought with armies or weapons, but with conscience, pride, guilt, and despair. It is the conflict between who we pretend to be and who we truly are, between our deepest yearnings and our darkest fears. His novels lay bare this inner struggle in ways that feel disturbingly familiar today. The underground man, paralyzed by his endless self-analysis, turns his brilliant mind into a tool of self-destruction. His overthinking breeds resentment and spite, which in turn drive him into acts that deepen his misery. Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment embodies another front in this war: intellectual arrogance. Convinced he is above morality, he murders an old pawnbroker, only to discover that his conscience is not so easily silenced. The very intelligence that fuels his pride becomes the blade that cuts him down. Dostoevsky's characters remind us that the fronts of this inner war bleed into each other. Self-sabotage feeds overthinking. Overthinking feeds pride, and pride collides with conscience until the whole person is torn apart. And yet, the torment is not meaningless. As Dostoevsky himself once confessed, man is a mystery. It needs to be unraveled. I am studying that mystery because I want to be a human being. His stories insist that to be human is to wrestle with these contradictions, to stumble between light and darkness, and to discover, often painfully, that truth cannot be escaped. I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I believe my liver is diseased. I refuse to consult a doctor from spite. By all this, I am only injuring myself and no one else. Few opening lines strike as brutally as these. With them, Dostoevsky introduces one of literature's most unsettling narrators, the underground man. He admits his sickness openly, yet what shocks us most is his honesty about his own sabotage. He knows he is worsening his misery, but he clings to it anyway. He refuses medical help, isolates himself, wallows in bitterness, not because he must, but because his spite insists on it. He wounds himself deliberately, as though pain were proof of his freedom. What makes this confession so haunting is how familiar it feels. Beneath the underground man's exaggerations, we glimpse something uncomfortably human, our own tendency to act against our best interests. Modern psychology has given this behavior a name: self-sabotage. Therapists speak of self-handicapping or internal resistance, the impulse to reject growth out of fear, pride, or the suspicion that we don't deserve better. Stephen Pressfield calls this force resistance, the most toxic force on the planet. Its target is the epicenter of our being, our genius, our soul. The underground man embodies this resistance perfectly. Whenever kindness, purpose, or love comes near, he rejects it, preferring the illusion of control that comes from saying no. At times, he even delights in his cruelty. Reflecting on tormenting petitioners, he admits, "The real sting of it lay in the fact that I was simply amusing myself by it." He gorges on resentment, yet feels disgusted with himself for doing so. This is the twisted logic of self-sabotage. Misery becomes a perverse kind of comfort, because happiness would require vulnerability. Dostoevsky shows us an extreme, but it is only a magnification of a universal problem. We see it when someone ruins a relationship by picking pointless fights, when a person turns down opportunities out of fear of failure, when shame keeps someone locked in regret long after others have forgiven them. Like the underground man, they live as if spite were a philosophy of life. And yet, even he admits that buried beneath his venom, there were many elements opposite to spite. They tormented me till I was ashamed. Love, tenderness, hope, all present, but strangled before they could breathe. This is why his story is not just about sickness of the body, but a sickness of the soul. Resentment poisons the well from which joy should flow. Nietzsche once remarked that often we avoid our highest callings because they terrify us more than failure. Jung reminded us, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Self-sabotage is the refusal of this choice, the safety of resentment over the risk of transformation. The underground man warns us what happens when pride and despair become a prison we build around ourselves. The way out begins not with more spite, but with compassion for the wounded parts we deny and courage to ask why we resist what could heal us. Dostoevsky leaves us with a quiet but powerful challenge: to stop believing the lie that nothing would satisfy me. In truth, as his bitter narrator admits, even something as small as sugar in tea could have given relief, if only he had allowed himself to accept it. He then also wrote, "I swear to you, gentlemen, that excessive consciousness is a disease, a genuine, absolute disease." What kind of writer dares to call consciousness itself a disease? Dostoevsky wasn't condemning thought, but warning us of its excess. He saw that when awareness turns into hyper-awareness, it begins to corrode action, joy, and even our capacity to live. In Notes from Underground, his infamous underground man embodies this curse. He is brilliant, painfully self-aware, and brutally honest about himself. But that very honesty becomes his torment. He recognizes his own weaknesses so acutely that he can barely move. He dissects every motive, calculates every outcome, and ends up trapped in his own head. Today we call this analysis paralysis. We convince ourselves that if we just think long enough, clarity will arrive. But as the underground man shows, endless reflection often leads nowhere. He obsesses over trivialities, like how to brush against a pompous officer on the street, imagining countless scenarios, rehearsing every possible line. Yet when the moment comes, he freezes. Later, at a dinner party, his relentless second-guessing ruins the evening before it begins. His thoughts circle endlessly, but his actions collapse into nothing. This is Dostoevsky's great insight. The intellect, left unchecked, can tyrannize the soul. The underground man envies the so-called ordinary man who simply acts without torturing himself with doubts. To think too much, he laments, is a kind of sickness, thought stripped of spontaneity, cut off from love, instinct, and vitality. We recognize the same sickness in our own time. Social media and constant information overload feed the cycle of overthinking. Should I take this job? Should I reply to this text now or later? Should I commit to this relationship? Or wait, just in case something better comes along? Every option analyzed, every choice postponed, and years slip away in hesitation. Modern psychology confirms what Dostoevsky intuited. Overactivation of the prefrontal cortex, the brain's planning center, can suppress intuition and emotion. Neuroscience tells us what Dostoevsky already knew through art. A life dominated by sterile calculation is a life half-lived. The underground man himself admits that pure rationality cannot account for what truly drives us. Human beings are not machines of reason. We act out of love, spite, hope, faith, forces that logic alone cannot explain. To reduce life to thought is to miss its essence. But there was something more in underground man as a reason for his self-sabotage. He wrote, "It takes something more than intelligence to act intelligently." Dostoevsky had little patience for the arrogance of cleverness. He understood that intellect, while dazzling, can become a curse when it feeds pride instead of wisdom. Many of his characters, Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, and the underground man in Notes from Underground, are brilliant, but their brilliance isolates them. They sneer at the world, convinced that everyone else is either cowardly or dull. Yet, in Dostoevsky's vision, intelligence without humility does not elevate. It corrodes. Take Raskolnikov. He builds a grand theory. Some men are so extraordinary that moral laws do not apply to them. With this conviction, he murders a pawnbroker, believing his act will prove his superiority. But reality strikes back. Instead of freedom, he finds himself shackled by guilt. He realizes bitterly that all is in a man's hands, and he lets it all slip through from sheer cowardice. His downfall is not a failure of intellect, but of courage. He cannot live up to his own theory. He spends the novel running, lying, hallucinating, trapped not by the police, but by his own conscience. The underground man suffers a similar fate. He boasts of being more highly developed than others, dismissing people as stupid, like sheep. Yet in the same breath, he admits, "I was a coward and a slave. Every decent man of our age must be a coward and a slave." His so-called intelligence only deepens his misery. It sharpens his awareness of his fear, but gives him no way out of it. He wears his failure like a badge of superiority, mistaking self-contempt for wisdom. Dostoevsky makes clear, pride in intellect, without the will to act, collapses into paralysis. This lesson is crystallized in Sonia's words to Raskolnikov. "Your worst sin is that you have destroyed and betrayed yourself for nothing." He believed his murder set him apart as extraordinary, but it left him as ordinary as anyone else. Weak, guilty, ashamed. Only when he kneels before Sonia, abandons his pride, and accepts punishment in Siberia does redemption begin. His intelligence nearly destroyed him. Humility saves him. Dostoevsky was not alone in this warning. Socrates insisted that wisdom begins with the admission of ignorance. Nietzsche mocked those free spirits who confuse vanity with freedom. Even Einstein remarked that great spirits must endure opposition, suggesting that resilience, not just raw intellect, marks true genius. For Dostoevsky, the real test of intelligence is courage, the ability to take responsibility, to endure suffering, and to act despite fear. The key insight is simple but profound. Brilliance without humility is fragile. Arrogance blinds, and cowardice hides beneath its mask. To act intelligently requires more than calculation. It requires conscience. Dostoevsky reminds us that wisdom is measured not by how sharply we think, but by how bravely we live. As he put it, "Man grows used to everything, the scoundrel. If he has a conscience, he will suffer for his mistake. That will be his punishment, as well as the prison." Conscience, Dostoevsky tells us, is a harsher judge than any court. In Crime and Punishment, the moment the crime is done, murderer's body revolts. Fever, delirium, and crushing guilt follow him like shadows. Though no one suspects him, his conscience has already locked him inside a prison far more suffocating than stone walls. Raskolnikov insists early on, "No one but me will suffer for this." Yet Dostoevsky shows that crime radiates suffering outward. The murder scars not only the victim's family, but also Raskolnikov's friends, and most painfully, his own soul. His internal torment proves a psychological truth modern psychology echoes. Guilt is not just a feeling, but a force. People may rationalize wrongdoing, but they rarely escape the gnawing inner voice that demands recognition. As one study on the novel notes, the overwhelming sense of guilt ultimately consumes him. His grand intellectual theory collapses under the weight of an undeniable human reality. What makes Dostoevsky's vision so piercing is that he doesn't treat conscience as abstract. He embodies it. Sonia, a poor young woman driven into prostitution to feed her starving family, becomes Raskolnikov's living conscience. Her faith, humility, and unwavering compassion present a moral mirror he cannot avoid. When he tells her, "Your worst sin is that you have destroyed and betrayed yourself for nothing," he realizes that in treating others as mere instruments of his theory, he has betrayed the very essence of himself, the capacity for love, empathy, and humanity. This is Dostoevsky's deeper point. The true punishment of crime is not prison, but the degradation of the soul. One loses not only peace of mind, but the ability to fully be human. And yet, Dostoevsky does not end in despair. The final chapters carry a faint but vital note of hope, which I will discuss in my last chapter of the video. Raskolnikov, at last, confesses and is sent to Siberia. The closing pages speak of a new story beginning, the stirrings of repentance and rebirth. In Dostoevsky's Christian vision, redemption is possible only when guilt is faced, suffering is accepted, and conscience is no longer denied. It is the felix culpa, the blessed fault, where through sin and pain, a soul finds the chance to change. The lesson stretches far beyond the novel. In modern life, we see echoes of this truth. People confessing crimes after years of secrecy, not to evade punishment, but to be free of the inner weight. Others turn to therapy or religion, searching for a way to release guilt's grip. We instinctively know that burying conscience is like burying something alive. It only grows more restless. Love in Dostoevsky's world is never the sweet and simple bliss that poets promise. It is a double-edged force, capable of saving a soul from despair, yet just as capable of dragging it into ruin. In his novels, the heart is not a gentle refuge, but a battlefield, where exaltation collides with jealousy, devotion with obsession, and tenderness with rage. To love, for Dostoevsky, is to suffer. And yet, it is also through love that suffering can be redeemed. As one of his underground narrators observes with bitter clarity, man is sometimes extraordinarily, passionately in love with suffering. And that is a fact. In this paradox lies Dostoevsky's enduring insight. Our wounds often become the very proof that love is real. We see this most vividly in the story of Raskolnikov and Sonia in Crime and Punishment. After the torment of his crime and years of inner agony, it is through Sonia's steadfast compassion that Raskolnikov finally begins to change. Dostoevsky describes them as renewed by love, the heart of each held infinite sources of life for the heart of the other. Love breathes new life into two broken spirits, his ravaged by guilt, hers by poverty and sacrifice. In this union, Dostoevsky shows that love does not erase suffering, but transforms it into meaning. As Ivan declares in the Brothers Karamazov, "What is hell? It is the suffering of being unable to love. If hell is lovelessness, then redemption must be the rediscovery of love, even in the darkest prison. And yet, this redemption is no easy gift. Sonia's devotion comes at immense cost. She bears poverty, shame, and self-sacrifice. She prostitutes herself to feed her family, embodying the truth that love demands not daydreams, but action. As Father Zosima cautions, love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared with love in dreams. It is precisely this harshness that Dostoevsky insists upon. Real love is lived through endurance, courage, and sacrifice. When Sonia reads Raskolnikov, the story of Lazarus, his delirious soul hears in her voice the promise of resurrection. He had risen again, and he knew it and felt it in all his being. This is no mere metaphor. It is a spiritual rebirth purchased through suffering. But Dostoevsky refuses easy consolation. 7 years of prison still await Raskolnikov, a reminder that redemption comes only through patience and humility. The same theme resounds across Dostoevsky's novels. In the Brothers Karamazov, Alyosha's compassion brings peace to broken spirits, while Dmitri's path shows that even violent passion can be reshaped by suffering into repentance. Again and again, Dostoevsky insists, love is a crucible. It can refine the soul, or consume it in flames. What ties these stories together is a conviction that suffering, when embraced with love, is never meaningless. As Dostoevsky himself wrote, "There is only one thing that I dread, not to be worthy of my sufferings. To endure without love is despair. To suffer with love is transformation." Modern psychology echoes this insight. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, claimed that love gave suffering its meaning. A truth Dostoevsky had already dramatized through Sonia and Raskolnikov. Even today, we see this in countless lives. Parents of disabled children who discover unexpected joy and sacrifice, widows who channel grief into acts of compassion, survivors who build communities of support. In each case, love turns agony into purpose. For Dostoevsky, then, love is not sentimental consolation, but the hardest human task. It requires sacrifice, endurance, and the willingness to suffer for another. Yet it is also the one force strong enough to redeem suffering itself. In the closing image of crime and punishment, Raskolnikov and Sonia's sick, pale faces were bright with the dawn of a new future. What were all the agonies of the past compared to this? Love had not erased them, but it had redefined them, transforming despair into the first glimmer of hope. This is Dostoevsky's final word on the heart. Love will wound, but it can also heal. It can destroy, but it can also resurrect. To live without it is hell. To embrace it, even through suffering, is the path to salvation. He then wrote, "The world calls them idiots, but not 1 in 1,000 has the innocence to deserve that name. What happens when true goodness enters a corrupt world?" Dostoevsky's The Idiot answers with the figure of Prince Myshkin, a man so radically honest, compassionate, and pure-hearted that society mocks him as a fool. To the jaded aristocrats of St. Petersburg, his innocence is not admirable but absurd. Yet in Myshkin's very foolishness, Dostoevsky places one of his deepest critiques. That genuine virtue is so rare, the world does not know what to do with it. Myshkin himself puts it bluntly, "The world calls them idiots, but not 1 in 1,000 has the innocence to deserve that name." His statement turns the insult back on his accusers. It is not innocence that is idiotic, but a society unable to recognize it. Unlike the cunning aristocrats who pride themselves on wit and calculation, Myshkin never apologizes for his gentleness. At one point, he simply says, "There's nothing more precious than to be good." Such a statement, unguarded and unashamed, exposes the cynicism around him. His mistakes, falling asleep mid-conversation, giving gifts to strangers, forgiving those who betray him, make him look ridiculous to others, but they reveal a man governed by empathy rather than ego. In Dostoevsky's moral universe, this is not weakness, it is strength. Myshkin becomes, in a sense, a whistleblower of the soul, one who lives by truth even when others cannot tolerate it. Dostoevsky makes the cost of this innocence painfully clear. When Mishkin enters a drawing room, it is as if a child has wandered among adults. He asks questions no one else dares. Do you think I wronged her? Do you think it was right? To the aristocrats, this blunt sincerity is madness. Yet, Dostoevsky flips the perspective. The world that sneers at him is itself distorted. In one unforgettable exchange, Mishkin tells Aglaya, "I am one of those who have a heart and no brains, and you are one of those who have brains and no heart." This paradox cuts to the novel's core. Intelligence without empathy is as destructive as empathy without worldly cleverness. Both lead to misery, but only the heart offers redemption. Compassion in Mishkin is not weakness, but clarity. Though his epilepsy marks him as mad in the eyes of others, Dostoevsky never treats his condition as shameful. Instead, it is through this vulnerability that Mishkin sees deeper into people's souls than they see into themselves. His illness makes him fragile, but it also strips him of vanity, allowing him to weep openly, forgive sincerely, and respond to cruelty with patience. Modern readers might call him an empath, someone who suffers deeply but becomes a quiet healer for others. As General Eponkin's mother observes, "A fool with a heart and no brains is just as unhappy as a fool with brains and no heart." Dostoevsky leaves us with the unsettling question: if the choice is between cleverness without compassion or compassion without cleverness, which truly matters? What looks like foolishness also serves as witness. Mishkin's refusal to fight back against mockery allows him to see others without disguise. When he listens to Ippolit's tortured speech on death, he weeps not out of pity but out of recognition of human frailty. When he confronts the hypocrisies of high society, his words cut precisely because they are guileless. This is not an isolated theme. Across Dostoevsky's works, love and goodness often borders on madness. In The Brothers Karamazov, Dmitri's passion for Grushenka drives him into violence and despair. In Demons, young Masha's hopeless love for Stavrogin strips her of ordinary joy and drags her into tragedy. In Crime and Punishment, Svidrigailov's fixation on Dunya feels less like affection than possession by a demon. Dostoevsky knew that the same passion that can illuminate life can also ignite ruin. In Mishkin's quiet, sacrificial love and Rogozhin's consuming jealousy, he sets before us two irreconcilable faces of desire. Seen today, the disaster of Rogozhin and Nastasia feels hauntingly familiar. It is the abusive partner who cannot bear rejection, the stalker who mistakes control for devotion, the jealous lover who lashes out when threatened with loss. Long before psychology named obsessive love disorder, Dostoevsky painted it vividly. Rogozhin's love is not a gift, but a prison. For Nastasia, who lives under its shadow, and for Rogozhin himself, chained to his torment. At the novel's climax, his passion collapses into violence. He kills Nastasia in a jealous frenzy while Mishkin weeps beside her body. Critics sometimes call this excessive, but Dostoevsky intended it as a stark truth. Love stripped of reason becomes indistinguishable from hate. By setting Rogozhin against Mishkin, Dostoevsky shows how narrow the path is between selfless love and selfish obsession. Both men see Nastasia as an ideal, but one tries to possess her, while the other seeks her freedom. Today's psychology tells us the same. Attachment can easily slip from care into control. Dostoevsky captures it with terrifying literalness. A man burns so fiercely with desire that he destroys the very person he adores. Jealous love is never healthy. Sociologists often call obsessive desire a kind of spiritual poverty, a hunger that tries to fill its emptiness through another's life. Dostoevsky dramatizes this brilliantly. In the letter-reading scene, Aglaya is calm and rational, Rogozhin is wild with need, Mishkin remains compassionate. It is a triangle that forecasts the tragic finale. Aglaya's grim observation, that Nastasia would kill herself rather than see Mishkin with another, becomes a prophecy fulfilled in blood. As Dostoevsky closes these love stories, his message is sobering. Desire is never neutral. It either elevates or annihilates. It can give life meaning, or it can strip life away. In Rogozhin and Nastasia, we see what happens when passion is left unchecked. Two lives twisted together in jealousy, pulled into a spiral from which there is no return. The resonance is as strong now as ever. In domestic violence cases splashed across headlines, in the devastation of betrayal, in the pain of relationships that smother rather than nurture. The best way to keep a prisoner from escaping is to make sure he never knows he's in prison. Dostoevsky's life was forged in the crucible of suffering. He passed through poverty, illness, and exile, yet from this furnace, he emerged with a rare insight into the human soul. His novels read like confessions of his century, each character embodying the contradictions and wounds of humanity. He once warned that nothing is more seductive for man than his freedom of conscience, but nothing is a greater cause of suffering. Freedom is dazzling, yet unbearable. It draws us with promises of authenticity, but terrifies us with the weight of responsibility. To escape this burden, men surrender themselves to comfort, to authority, to habit. At first glance, comfort feels harmless, a quiet refuge from life's storms. But Dostoevsky knew better. In The House of the Dead, his prison memoir, he saw that what broke men was not pain, but the deprivation of choice. One observer of his work noted, "The whole point of prison, as Dostoevsky experienced it, is to restrict people's ability to make their own choices. Choice is what makes us human. When a man gives up choice, even willingly for the sake of ease, he gives up his very humanity." This is no distant 19th century lesson. Today, countless people drift into invisible prisons, jobs they despise but dare not leave, relationships that drain them yet feel safer than solitude, routines that keep them numb but not alive. From childhood, society scripts our lives, school, career, marriage, retirement, and we follow the path without ever asking if it is truly ours. Modern commentators have called this conformity an invisible prison, where fear of change convinces us that the cage is freedom. Dostoevsky would not be surprised. He saw long ago how willingly people mistake security for meaning. Yet, as Raskolnikov insists in Crime and Punishment, to live deeply is to suffer, but to flee suffering is to numb the soul. Dostoevsky reminds us in another line, "Man is unhappy because he doesn't know he's happy. It's only that." Why then do we cling so desperately to the familiar? Often it is fear. Fear of failure, fear of ridicule, fear of the unknown. Dostoevsky's Underground Man exposes this dilemma with painful honesty. He sometimes acts against his own interest, just because, only to prove that he is free. Better to wound himself than to dissolve into predictability. His rebellion, however destructive, testifies to a truth Dostoevsky cherished, that life without struggle is not life at all. Psychologists today echo this insight. When people follow predefined paths without questioning whether these align with their true desires, they stagnate. They become prisoners of expectation, slaves to the approval of others. Dostoevsky would argue that human beings long for authenticity, even if it comes at the cost of pain. He once wrote that, "The essence of humanness lies in the possibility of surprise. A man who risks nothing, who refuses to surprise even himself, is already half dead." Even in Siberia, Dostoevsky saw prisoners lash out at guards, knowing they would be beaten, simply to feel that they still possessed freedom of choice. A scholar noted that such men would do anything, no matter how self-destructive, to prove they are not mere organs of nature. To choose, even recklessly, was to assert humanity. Translated into modern life, this means that fear of change is nothing less than fear of life itself. But freedom is never easy. The Grand Inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov reveals the paradox. People beg for bread and certainty, not liberty. They lay their freedom at the feet of authority, whispering, "Make us your slaves, but feed us." The Inquisitor declares that Christ's gift of freedom was too heavy for humanity to bear. Dostoevsky, however, sides with Christ. Freedom is difficult, but it is the only path to dignity. Without faith, whether faith in God, in love, or in a higher truth, freedom collapses into chaos, and men run back into the arms of their jailers. Sonia, the humble prostitute in Crime and Punishment, voices the counterpoint. She tells Raskolnikov that suffering cannot be avoided, but through it, the soul may be redeemed. Her words embody Dostoevsky's ultimate conviction that freedom and faith are bound together. Faith gives us the courage to carry freedom's burden, while freedom allows us to love with authenticity. In the end, Dostoevsky leaves us with a challenge. Will we continue to live in invisible prisons of comfort, mistaking numbness for happiness? Or will we step into the difficult, dangerous, yet redemptive space of true freedom? His answer resounds through every page he wrote. A life without struggle, risk, and faith is no life at all. Comfort zones may soothe us, but they shrink us. To be fully human is to choose, even when choice leads to suffering. The price of freedom is pain, but only through this struggle do we prove we are truly alive. Yet Dostoevsky challenges us to love what society mocks. He shows how innocence can be crushed by ugliness, rejected simply for refusing to compromise. The spiritual vision of Father Zosima in the Brothers Karamazov is a striking example. His counsel was simple and radical. Love all God's creation, the whole and every grain of sand in it. Love every leaf, every ray of God's light. Love everything. Such words sound almost foolish in a pragmatic, competitive world, and yet, in their radical tenderness, they reveal a truth our hardened age often forgets, that even the smallest creature bears the divine. This struggle is not confined to fiction. In modern times, a whistleblower who dares to speak truth may be branded a troublemaker. A teacher who genuinely cares for underprivileged children might be dismissed in an education system obsessed with statistics. Activists who defend refugees are often ridiculed by fearful crowds. Time and again, society misunderstands or tramples what is soft, failing to see that gentleness is strength in its purest form. Mishkin, on his first night in St. Petersburg, sits alone and whispers with unexplainable joy, "I can't explain myself. It's something to thank God for. What have I done to deserve it?" That bewildered gratitude, so foreign to the jaded, is precisely what makes him too good for this world. When society triumphs over innocence, Dostoevsky suggests the result is moral decay. For him, a pure heart shines a light that exposes corruption. The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for, he wrote. Our culture, too, is not always kind to its dreamers and believers, the idiots of our age, mentors, volunteers, caregivers, those who insist on seeing dignity in every person, are often ridiculed or ignored. Yet Dostoevsky's vision urges us to recognize their hidden power. What society mocks as foolishness may be the very thing keeping it alive. Father Zosima's command to love everything is not mere piety. It is an antidote to despair. In the end, Dostoevsky leaves us with a paradox. Society and the innocent soul will always clash, for one is tempered steel and the other delicate glass. But if beauty, empathy, and humility survive, even if only in fragments, then perhaps they can, as Mishkin believed, save the world. Then he wrote, "Nothing is more seductive for man than his freedom of conscience, but nothing is a greater cause of suffering." Few writers wrestled with the paradox of freedom as relentlessly as Dostoevsky. Freedom promises dignity, growth, and selfhood, yet it also drags behind it a crushing weight: the demand to choose rightly. Our own culture echoes these dilemmas. We praise freedom of speech, yet grow uneasy when it produces voices we dislike. We defend freedom of enterprise until its consequences unsettle us. In every age, some seek to silence discomfort by trading liberty for order. Dostoevsky foresaw this temptation. His inquisitor coldly declares that most men do not want freedom at all. They want relief from responsibility. They prefer what he calls a freedom of a higher kind, the illusion of liberty without the burden of doubt. This is the bargain authoritarian systems offer. Surrender your conscience, and in exchange receive peace, direction, and bread. And yet, Dostoevsky also shows us the opposite, what the genuinely free soul looks like. Alyosha Karamazov, the gentle monk, embodies freedom not as self-assertion, but as self-giving. Father Zosima instructs him, "If you sincerely make yourself responsible for everything and for all men, you will see at once that you are to blame for everyone and for all things." Freedom here is inseparable from love. To be free is not to stand apart from others, but to shoulder their burdens as one's own. Dostoevsky insists that freedom without responsibility is lethal. Freedom means unpredictability, the possibility of choosing even against our own interest. It is precisely this unpredictability that makes humans irreducible to machines. But because our choices can harm, freedom demands conscience as its anchor. Modern parallels abound. The voter who casts a ballot must live with the government that follows. The entrepreneur who pursues a dream risks unemployment if it fails. Societies often try to cushion such consequences by narrowing choices, outsourcing them to experts, or restricting debate. Dostoevsky warns that this temptation, though comforting, empties freedom of its very meaning. To be human is to bear the awe and terror of real choice. This is why, for Dostoevsky, freedom is bound up with faith. In the Brothers Karamazov, Jesus rejects the devil's offer to turn stones into bread, a shortcut that would remove human choice from belief. Only in freedom can love exist, because only in freedom can one truly say yes. Without that risk, morality and faith are reduced to obedience. Responsibility, however, means action, not passivity. Dostoevsky scorned those who excused themselves by hiding behind false theories or hollow words. Raskolnikov himself admits bitterly, "The most offensive thing is not their lying, but that they lie and worship their own lying." True freedom requires stepping forward, risking error, and taking responsibility for consequences. A society that never dares, Dostoevsky implies, never grows. Thus, Dostoevsky redefines liberty. It is not escape from responsibility, but its fulfillment. It is freedom wedded to love, conscience, and sacrifice. To love one's neighbor as oneself, he insists, is not sentiment, but the highest exercise of freedom. Every decision about others becomes a decision about oneself. As Gary Saul Morson reminds us, the human soul is so little known, so mysterious, that there can be no final judges, only people made free by God. We carry this freedom whether we want it or not, and with it, the responsibility. Dostoevsky leaves us with a sober charge. Freedom should never be an excuse to evade duty. It is the chance, terrifying and magnificent, to rise. Without allowing himself to realize it, Ivan makes the wished-for murder possible. Dostoevsky never tired of probing the contradictions that make us human. He understood that the fiercest prisons are not built of stone but of pride, rationalization, and fear. Among his characters, none illustrate this more vividly than Raskolnikov of Crime and Punishment and Ivan Karamazov of the Brothers Karamazov. Both are men of intellect and passion. Both deceive themselves with grand theories, and both discover that the mind can be a ruthless jailer. In their downfall lies Dostoevsky's stark warning that human beings are most vulnerable not to chains imposed from without, but to the stories we whisper to ourselves. Ivan Karamazov embodies a different torment. His rebellion begins not with arrogance, but with outrage at innocent suffering. In his famous rebellion speech, he refuses to accept any universe that permits children's pain. He insists he cannot believe in a God who allows such cruelty. Yet, paradoxically, Ivan loves the idea of justice too much to abandon it completely. He denies with one hand and clings with the other. His philosophy conceals another denial, his wish that his father might die. Ivan's tragedy is that he cannot live in the faith he attacks, nor in the disbelief he professes. The line so often attributed to him, "If there is no God, everything is permitted," encapsulates the danger. He wants to be free of divine order, yet cannot endure the abyss it opens. His mind splits under the strain, conjuring a devil to debate with, arguing with shadows of himself. Like Raskolnikov, Ivan learns that theory cannot contain a living conscience. The very logic that gave him strength corrodes his soul. Pride whispers that we are extraordinary, that our anger is justified, that our choices bear no cost. But conscience always resurfaces. Raskolnikov dreams of innocent victims. Ivan invents dialogues with his devil. Dostoevsky shows us how the self, when dishonest, turns against itself. As one line from Raskolnikov's world observes, "The man who has a conscience suffers whilst acknowledging his sin. That is his punishment." And yet Dostoevsky does not leave his readers in despair. If self-deception isolates, love rescues. Raskolnikov confesses not out of strength, but because Sonia, bearing her own suffering, stays with him in silence. She refuses to condemn him, yet refuses to excuse him. Her presence makes evasion impossible. Ivan, by contrast, faces his torment alone, locked in conversation with phantoms. His breakdown is more tragic, yet even in him, love is not extinguished. He cannot forgive, but he also cannot entirely deny his compassion. For Dostoevsky, this is the thread of hope. Compassion cracks even the hardest self-deception. The lesson extends far beyond the novels. Modern life brims with rationalizations. They deserved my harsh words. I had no choice. The system is to blame. Like Ivan and Raskolnikov, we construct inner monologues that excuse us from guilt. Dostoevsky urges us to interrogate these stories. Is this my truth, or is it my pride speaking? When anger feels righteous, or when detachment feels clever, we must ask whether we are deceiving ourselves to avoid responsibility. Dostoevsky closes Crime and Punishment with a paradoxical piece. After confessing, Raskolnikov sleeps soundly, whispering, "I'm a murderer," before drifting into rest. The admission brings more healing than all his justifications combined. This is Dostoevsky's answer. Better the agony of truth than the comfort of a lie. Across his works, the same wisdom resounds. In Notes from Underground, he warned of the prisons of comfort. In The Idiot, he showed how society ridicules innocence. In the Brothers Karamazov, he exposed the burden of freedom. And in the stories of Raskolnikov and Ivan, he mapped the hidden terrain of self-deception. Together, these lessons form a single creed. What seems to shield us often destroys us, and what seems to break us may be our salvation. To live Dostoevsky's lesson is to embrace discomfort, not avoid it. It is to recognize that kindness is not weakness, that freedom demands responsibility, and that honesty about our flaws is the only way forward. The most important thing, Dostoevsky wrote, is to love others like yourself. That's the great thing, and that's everything. Nothing else is wanted. Above all, don't lie to yourself. Dostoevsky put this warning into the mouth of Father Zosima, but it was also his personal credo. He knew what it meant to live on the edge of despair. Yet out of this crucible of suffering, he forged a vision not of cynicism, but of radical hope. Dostoevsky's novels are steeped in darkness, murder, betrayal, loss, and doubt. But they almost always lead toward light. For him, hope was not cheap optimism, nor the denial of suffering, but the discovery of meaning in the very heart of pain. Dostoevsky believed that transcendence comes through three intertwined paths: humility, suffering, and beauty. Humility is the courage to face truth without self-deception. Above all, don't lie to yourself is not just moral advice, it is survival. In an age of illusions, spin, and self-justification, this command is more urgent than ever. To face life honestly means admitting weakness, limits, and guilt, Yet it is precisely through this honesty that renewal begins. The second path is suffering, which Dostoevsky called the mirror of the soul. Pain shatters our illusions of control and exposes the pride we cling to. But in breaking us open, it awakens compassion. In his novels, characters who endure genuine suffering often find redemption, while those who flee it sink deeper into emptiness. Suffering, for Dostoevsky, was never an end in itself. It was the fire that purified, the storm that revealed what truly matters. And finally, there is beauty. When Dostoevsky writes, "The world will be saved by beauty," he does not mean art or aesthetics in a superficial sense. He means beauty as truth, love, and goodness, the radiance of meaning shining through brokenness. Beauty for him is not escape, but illumination. It redeems life by reminding us that beyond despair lies the possibility of love. Beauty is the lamp in the darkness, the note of harmony at the end of chaos, the grace that transforms mere survival into something worth living for. This vision speaks with startling clarity to our own fractured age. In a world of polarization, digital illusions, and moral exhaustion, Dostoevsky calls us back to the inner work of transformation. His novels echo the dilemmas of our time, the fragmentation of truth, the hunger for meaning, the fear that life is slipping into nihilism. Yet his response is not despair, but transcendence, rooted in humility, tested by suffering, and illuminated by beauty. Dostoevsky's wisdom offers a kind of compass. Be honest about your soul. Let suffering refine you rather than destroy you, and never lose sight of beauty as love. These are not abstract ideals, but practical guides for modern existence. Whether we are struggling as individuals or as a society, his message, like a quiet yet persistent melody, insists that even in the darkest hour, hope is possible, and that the way forward begins within. Loving humility is marvelously strong, the strongest of all things, and there is nothing else like it. Few lines capture Dostoevsky's vision of spiritual strength better than this. Humility, when it is born of love, becomes a force stronger than pride, stronger than brute willpower, stronger even than despair. For Dostoevsky, humility is not humiliation. It is the courage to bow before truth, to admit our blindness, and to face ourselves without disguise. Socrates once declared, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Dostoevsky would agree, but he sharpens the point. Not only must life be examined, it must be examined honestly, without excuses. That is why his characters, from the underground man to Raskolnikov, so often break apart. They resist this radical honesty until suffering forces them into humility. What does this humility look like in practice? It means giving up comforting lies, that we are invulnerable, morally flawless, or always right. It means accepting contradiction, acknowledging that within us exist both love and resentment, guilt and compassion. The humble person, instead of rationalizing or justifying, asks, "What can I learn here? Where am I wrong?" Zosima urges us to use humble love instead of force, a command utterly opposed to today's culture of bravado. In our age, strength is often equated with dominance, control, or having it all together. Dostoevsky reminds us instead, the truest strength is born in admitting weakness, forgiving others, and seeking truth. Humility also binds us to others. Pride isolates. It sets us above and apart. In Notes from Underground, the narrator's pride drives him into misery, cutting him off from human warmth. Humility, by contrast, dissolves these barriers. Zosima insists that if we live with humble love, you may subdue the whole world, not by power, but by understanding. In a time of bitter polarization, this lesson is urgent. Humility means listening, not lecturing. It means recognizing that my ignorance is no less real than yours, and that compassion often speaks louder than certainty. Literature too reflects this truth. Redemption almost always begins with humility. When public figures or even ordinary people drop their masks and admit fault, the world often responds with compassion rather than condemnation. Humility humanizes. It makes space for mercy. Dostoevsky's challenge, then, is clear. Confront your own limits with honesty. Resist the temptation of self-deception. Admit weakness, not as defeat, but as the beginning of wisdom. In doing so, we rediscover love, for others and for ourselves. As Father Zosima taught, the strongest power we possess is not pride nor control, but loving humility. This is why Dostoevsky gives Zosima such luminous words. Love all God's creation, love every leaf, every ray of God's light. Once you perceive it, you will begin to comprehend and love the whole world. Such boundless love does not come cheaply. It is born of brokenness, humility, and the discipline of suffering. Suffering, ordinary or profound, grounds us in reality. It reminds us of fragility, mortality, and the things that truly matter. Dostoevsky never glorifies pain for its own sake. He portrays it with brutal honesty. Yet he insists that it is the truest teacher of the soul. Thinkers like Vladimir Solovyov agreed, seeing suffering as a refinement of the spirit. Even today, research confirms that those who face grief, rather than suppress it, often develop a deeper appreciation for life. Avoidance may numb us, but it also flattens our capacity for joy. And in the end, Dostoevsky leaves us with a paradox of hope. Suffering, far from being meaningless, is the very soil out of which beauty and redemption grow. Through pain, the possibility of love, and even salvation emerges. Gentlemen, the prince assures us that beauty will save the world. Beauty, in his vision, is not merely aesthetic decoration or pleasant appearance. It is moral, spiritual, and redemptive. It is the light that emerges from love, sacrifice, and suffering. This is why readers from Dorothy Day to modern philosophers have taken the phrase seriously, not as romantic exaggeration, but as a radical claim of hope. What then is beauty? In The Idiot, Prince Mishkin conceives beauty as Christ-like love, selfless, humble, and radiant with mercy. Ippolit sneers that Mishkin is in love. But in Dostoevsky's world, that is precisely the point. True beauty is inseparable from love, and love cannot exist without vulnerability and pain. Father Zosima echoes this when he speaks of perceiving the divine mystery in things through universal love. To see beauty, for Dostoevsky, is to glimpse the sacred hidden within the ordinary and the broken. But how can beauty save us? Dostoevsky frames it as the great antidote to nihilism. Where meaninglessness breeds despair, beauty awakens meaning. Every act of compassion, forgiveness, or honesty is a spark of beauty in the moral sense, and these sparks together build a world that resists collapse. Dorothy Day once said Dostoevsky's works supported and sustained her as she served the poor. In this way, his vision of beauty became a lived source of strength. Beauty is not passive. It is active service, forgiveness, solidarity, the willingness to stand with others in their pain. In a world of cynicism and hatred, beauty is resistance. Modern experience affirms this truth. People are profoundly moved by art, film, and literature that show suffering yet point toward hope. Such works resonate because they tap into a beauty born of truth. Technology and science may advance society, but they cannot redeem the human spirit. Redemption, as neuroscience even suggests, often comes through aesthetic awe, moments of beauty that expand empathy and transcend the self. Dostoevsky knew this before science confirmed it. Beauty lifts us out of narrow ego and points us toward the universal. Beauty also unites. Every culture, every religion reveres some form of it, whether in art, nature, or human goodness. For Dostoevsky, beauty reflects God's creation. For the secular mind, it reflects the highest possibilities of humanity. His characters often experience moments of revelation when they encounter beauty in love, sacrifice, or even in suffering transformed into compassion. As Keats once wrote, "Beauty is truth, truth beauty." And as C.S. Lewis suggested, beauty is a glimpse of the eternal. In this sense, beauty is the one language that crosses boundaries and draws us together. Dostoevsky anchors his vision not in utopia, but in hope. In the Brothers Karamazov, the world's problems remain unresolved, yet the novel closes with a promise that love perseveres. Dostoevsky believed in incremental salvation. Every kind word, every act of care, every work of true art is a seed of beauty, and together they become something greater. Philosopher Leah Howard puts it well. Beauty is the opposite of information rabbit holes, because it broadens our vision and opens us to one another. In today's hyperpolarized, algorithm-driven world, this is revolutionary advice. Resist the smallness of division and instead seek the expansiveness of beauty. Practically, Dostoevsky urges us to look for beauty both in the everyday and in the eternal. It can be a sunset or a symphony, patience with a loved one, or even the courage to suffer without resentment. In Crime and Punishment, Sonia's quiet sacrifice and love embody the beauty that eventually saves Raskolnikov. Beauty is salvation through suffering, not by avoiding it, but by allowing it to be transfigured into compassion. The Christian cross for Dostoevsky is the highest image of this truth. From agony comes the radiance of redemption. But this vision need not be limited to faith. Secular humanists can also see beauty in the lives of those who dedicate themselves to others, who transform hardship into love. In the end, Dostoevsky insists that beauty is both mysterious and dangerous. He wrote in his diary, "The awful thing is that beauty is mysterious as well as terrible. God and the devil are fighting there, and the battlefield is the heart of a man." Beauty can uplift or destroy, inspire truth or vanity. Yet he never doubted that, if embraced with humility, beauty is the one force strong enough to redeem despair. Thus, Dostoevsky's wisdom calls us to awaken, to face suffering as the mirror of our soul, to respond with compassion, and to nurture beauty wherever it appears, in art, in kindness, in sacrifice. Even in a fractured and cynical age, each of us has the power to create beauty in another's life. And every such act, no matter how small, is a step toward salvation. For Dostoevsky, this was not a metaphor, but a promise. Love is stronger than death, and beauty is stronger than despair. He closes the Brothers Karamazov with a biblical epigraph that captures this vision of transformation. "Except a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it abideth alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit."